start recording at any time. Okay, Shiva, if you're ready, we can start.
Sounds good. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our Journalism and Democracy panel. Many of us are very, very delighted that this evening has come together because this has been something we've been thinking about for a long time. For several of you joining us, Indiaspora is known territory, but for those of you for whom it may be new, I'm going to take a couple of minutes to just share a brief intro to Indiaspora. Indiaspora is a not-for-profit organization. We are a network of global Indian origin leaders from diverse backgrounds and professions who are committed to inspiring the diaspora to be a force for good by providing a platform to collaborate, build community engagement, and catalyze social change. Indiaspora is a non-partisan organization. Feels relevant to state that today when we are talking about democracy and journalism. And what we are committed to is building bridges between the global community of leaders of the diaspora and leaders in India. By convening curated events, connecting leaders, and spearheading thought leadership, Indiaspora aims to bring together the professionally, geographically, generationally, and religiously diverse Indian diaspora towards collective action worldwide to increase philanthropy and social impact, foster entrepreneurship and innovation, and build non-partisan political and civic engagement. There are a lot of hyphenated words I used there, but the core idea is that this is about building a community that wants to be a force for good. And this is across industries. And today's conversation is about building stronger democracies. It's a special thrill to have our very, very distinguished panelists. And I'm particularly thrilled that Sri Srinivasan is our moderator today. Sri is an ambassador of Indiaspora. He is CEO and co-founder of Digimentors and has had a long and distinguished engagement from several aspects in journalism. Today, he's also the president of SAJA, the South Asian Journalists Association, which he helped found, and this is their 30th year and he's back as their president. It says something that they've brought him back as president, or again celebrates the 30th year, I think. There are many things I can share about Sri, but what is key, I think, is that he's a true community builder and a friend of Indiaspora of long standing. And I find it particularly interesting that he demonstrates allyship in the best ways in every engagement that I've had with him. So Sri, without further ado, please take it.
Wow, that is some introduction, Shobha. Thank you so much. I don't know if I can live up to it, especially where I'm coming to you from. I'm hiding sort of in a closet type room at the Sundaram Tagore Gallery in New York City. And I welcome all of you. The Sundaram Tagore Gallery is one of the most important Indian and contemporary art galleries in the world. And right now, outside, you might hear some sounds of the JLF Lit Fest New York closing reception is happening right now outside, and I'm in here. But I'm so happy to be with all of you. We are not very far away from the shadow of Ground Zero, and here we are on 9/11. Here we are all these years later. And we are also in the shadow of last night's debate, and leave it to the amazing team at Indiaspora to time this so well that we're getting all of us a chance to talk together about what happened last night and where we go from here. There are, in some ways, a very few days left for the elections, but also a lot of days left for the elections. And we're going to explore all of that in this conversation today. I would love for everyone who's watching to please tell us who you are in the comments and where you're watching from, and also, how long you've been involved with Indiaspora. I think it'd be nice for people to hear that about each of you. So in the comments, please say hello, and we will come to you to get your questions throughout the conversation. I've told the team that my role as moderator is kind of timekeeper and asking them to make sure that we highlight all the important points that they have to make, but also to really come to you, our wonderful Indiaspora audience, and get your questions. So please start typing in the chat, and we look forward to talking to all of you. So we hope to see you introduce yourselves. And then the Indiaspora team is also here I hope you'll all say hello as well. And there's Amita saying hello, and she is right now in Seattle. Is that right, Amita? So let's get that Indiaspora blanketing America going. I want just about America. I will just say about the breadth of things happening. The JLF Lit Fest is an example of the various fields in which Indian Americans are having impact. And after Houston and New York City, the JLF Lit Fest, which is partnering with Indiaspora, is coming next to Boulder this weekend, and the weekend after that in Seattle, and then the weekend after that in Raleigh and Chapel Hill. So if you have friends in any of those places, please send them to jlflitfest.org, jlflitfest.org. It's a fantastic program, and you'll learn a lot there, just as you will today. So our conversation is about journalism and democracy, and Indiaspora is showing its convening power by bringing together three fantastic speakers who represent all kinds of diversity in terms of where they look at where they come from in terms of the media landscape, as well as where we can hear from them their thoughts on where elections and democracy are going. So I'm thrilled to say hello to our three speakers who are with us. We are joined by Sonal Shah, CEO of Texas Tribune. Hi, Sonal. And we're joined by also Chandran Sankaran, who is the founder of GigEffect. And Chandran is also a longtime member of Indiaspora. He has done so many interesting things that you're going to hear about, but GigEffect is something that I learned about when we got together for the first time and met in Texas, where of course Sonal is as well. And Lakshmi Parthasarathi is CEO of Global Press. And I'm going to ask each of them to talk for a few minutes about about their own work and how they are approaching this idea of journalism and democracy. And then I have some questions for them, and then we're going to take your questions. So this is going to be an action-packed about 50 minutes. So let's get going. And my dear friend, Sonal Shah, who I have known for way too much time for either of us to admit, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Shri. And let me just also say thank you to Indiaspora for doing this. It's incredible how much Indiaspora has not just grown, but the breadth of the topics that are being covered here. And I really appreciate that. And Shri, it has been many, many, many years. But a kudos to you. You were sort of early in journalism as a South Asian, sort of really making it available for everybody else, and a mentor to many in the field and many in the industry. So thank you for all that you have done and continue to do, and just the leadership you bring on a constant basis. My name is Sonal Shah. I am the CEO of the Texas Tribune. We are the largest statewide news organization in the United States. We are a nonprofit, started about 15 years ago. What we found about 15 years ago is that about 2,900 newsrooms have been are closing across the United States and local levels. So local news is shutting down, while national news is, there's limited national news, but actually a lot more, even less local news. And we started 15 years ago with the idea that no one was covering the Texas State House. And what we decided to do was to actually create a group of journalists that were only focused on the State House. Just to remember here, our legislature, the Texas legislature, only meets once every other year. So it doesn't even meet every year, it meets every other year. So the consequences of the decisions made every other year and only for 6 months has a huge impact for a year and a half for residents in Texas. So when we created the newsroom, it was really to invest in understanding policy in Texas and the impact it had on people's lives, policy and politics. And what we learned over the years is starting a nonprofit newsroom was more impactful than having a for-profit newsroom, only because the news industry was so dramatically changing with the ads going on to Google, Facebook, other places, that we were losing money and there wasn't an investment in journalism. There was an investment in the technology, but not in the journalism itself. So by starting it as a nonprofit, we focused on really investing in the journalism. 15 years later, we have started now local newsrooms across, we're going to start a network of newsrooms across Texas because we recognize that 27 counties in Texas have no news. And what matters to us is that we are making sure there is valid, good, reliable information in communities across the state. And we have helped nonprofit newsrooms across the country get started as they are starting their new models. So with that, I know there's much more to discuss, Shri, but I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
Sure, thank you, and congratulations on what you've done with the Texas Tribune. I wanted everyone to see this true multicultural newsroom that you have, and not just newsroom, but the entire team. And tell us a little bit about where you are in Austin, and what is the funding model, and how people can support what you do.
So just to say, the newsroom reflects the diversity of the state itself. We are 40% Latino, Hispanic, 13% Black, largest Black population of any state in the United States, and 6.5% Asian American and growing. So it just sort of reflects what our state looks like, and the newsroom reflects that. We are based in Austin, Texas, but we have journalists in 16 cities across the state, and we cover regions in North Texas, East Texas, South Texas, and West Texas. And we think it's important to be representative of Texas. And we cover everything from the State House now to education, K through 12, higher ed and pathways, public health, mental health, and women's health. Can imagine where some of the stories are going on women's health in Texas. And we cover energy, environment, and climate across the state. And what we have found is our job is to build trust across the state. We are a nonprofit, which means 25% of our funding comes from foundations, 25% of our funding comes from individuals, 35% of our funding comes from advertisements. Because we do a big festival called the Texas Tribune Festival, and we do about 40 events a year. And then about 10% from membership, and some odds and ends on syndication and other pieces. But it's a pretty diverse funding source. And for us, it's important that we stay diverse and not too dependent on any one funding source. So in case there are other things happening, we are always maintaining that diversity. And
we want everyone who can donate. Look at this interesting thing you're offering, a luxury 2-night escape to Lady Bird Lake in Austin. That's kind of cool. So everyone, please check out texastribune.org. All right, let's go now to Chandran. Chandran, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, after a career in tech, building software companies, I launched a nonprofit called GigaFact. So I'm the founder of GigaFact. And what GigaFact does is essentially it's kind of built on the theory that has started becoming established in the last decade or so of fact check. So when you see a claim on social media and someone with credibility and kind of great sourcing intervenes in that claim and brings facts to bear, people may not like it, people may not agree, but it tends to chill the virality with which those claims spread. And there's some really interesting research on that. With that kind of as the starting theory, what we decided to do was create an opportunity for hundreds of local and regional outlets across the United States to add a fact-checking desk to their regular operations and actually teach them and give them software tools to intercept claims on Reddit and Facebook and elsewhere on social media that's in their wheelhouse that pertains to the communities they operate in. So for instance, we have a network of newsrooms that we've brought into this process. In Wisconsin, one of the really meaningful state newsrooms, Wisconsin Watch, fact checks claims made by people relevant to Wisconsin, and which we know is a hugely important swing state, right? Now, but even beyond, it's just kind of really focused on that community and saying, we're going to take the job of intercepting claims that are flying around on social media that we can do something about and bring fantastic, authoritative, well-sourced facts to bear. We have in El Paso, Texas, a Metro newsroom that's a super important border community, as we all know, that's doing the same work for their community, right? And so this is what GigaFact is doing, is really tooling, training, offering software tools, and kind of allowing people to start doing this work of intercepting claims. And it turns out that this work of intercepting claims is not just good karma, right? It's great business as well for these newsrooms, because you're intercepting these zeitgeist conversations that are going on social media. So it's been a terrific start to that. And we have also, for this election, we're rolling out an AI tool across newsrooms in the US to specifically focus on swing state and competitive battleground elections and claims being made by public officials in about 50 battleground elections for Congress and Senate. And so we have a bit of a front row seat to the swirl of misinformation and election democracy journalism, with a very particular way of inviting high quality sources to actually be activisty about intercepting claims that are traveling unchecked on social media.
I love how active what you're doing is, and that interception is a great way to think about that, and intercepting because we now have to be active, all of us who are trying to navigate the landscape, the media landscape that's changing. You have to be active. So we're just looking at your site at gigafact.org. So everyone, please check that out, and tell us about your funding and how you do your thing.
Yeah, so we are funded largely through a few philanthropies and several individuals, and we invite anyone who wants to donate a small amount to support GigaFact to do that from our website through this donate button. If someone wants to be a more substantive funding partner to GigaFact, shoot me an email at chandran@gigafact.org. We are doing mighty things with a small budget. We are a team of about 6 people. 2 of them are software engineers. So we're a very tech-forward nonprofit, because what we're trying to do is kind of create this model so that literally hundreds of local sources can be doing this work, and in so doing, we're building kind of this large kind of level of resilience and inoculation against carelessly flung information, in all the places that people consume it.
Well, thank you, Chandran, for doing that and helping so many people understand all the problems that are out there. By the way, is that a rocket that we see behind you from the Tintin comic books?
You win a prize of some sort. It is a rocket from the Tintin comics, and it's a very, very peculiar subsegment that recognizes it, and it's out there as a Rorschach test. So I've judged you.
Yeah, and that's from Destination Moon, that some of you will remember as one of the great
literary masterpieces.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And since we, Indian Americans and Indiaspora folks know Tintin, I'm going to show everyone that cover.
Yes.
And so there you see it right there. That's the cover, and right behind Chandran there. So that's fun. And thank you so much again, Chandran, for being with us. I'll just read some of the comments. I'm asking everyone who's watching, including Indiaspora staff, to please introduce yourselves, and Indiaspora team, tell us what you do for Indiaspora. But everyone watching, please say hi. Shweta's watching from New Jersey, and she says, unbiased journalism times multiracial democracy, one of my favorite topics. Thank you. And Arun Kumar is here. Great to see you, Arun. And it says, great to see you, Sri, Sonal, Lakshmi, and Chandran. A great group to discuss this topic. And I want to hear from Arun in the question and answer section myself later. So everyone, please continue to do that. Lakshmi, over to you.
Well, thank you, Sri. And I'm so glad to be here with Sonal and Chandran. Huge fan of the Texas Tribune, have been for years. A great local journalism. And I think fact checking, after we just saw last night's debate, is critical in this country and around the world. So my name's Lakshmi Parthasarathi, and I'm COO of Global Press. We actually don't operate in the United States, but I think I have a really interesting perspective on this topic because we're actually an international nonprofit news organization. We've been around for about 19 years now, and we train and employ local women reporters in some of the world's most pressing, some of the world's most challenging parts of the world. And these are on really pressing topics in places where issues are acute, underreported, and connected to wider global trends. So we've trained hundreds of reporters since 2006 and employed them. And today we focus on investigative and explanatory coverage of global health, civil liberties, and the environment. And all of this journalism, which I think is so important, is both for local audiences and for international audiences. Often journalism is not by people that it is for. And that's, I think, a really important part of the conversation today when it comes to journalism and democracy. Like, who is journalism really for? Who is part of producing that journalism? And I think that's something that local reporters, I know and Sonal's work at the Texas Tribune, she knows about this. At Global Press, local access to sources is unprecedented when you're dealing with people that actually live in the communities and understand the topics so deeply. We work in places such as Mexico, Uganda, Sri Lanka, Zimbabwe, Democratic Republic of Congo, some of the hardest hit by attacks on press on freedom of the press. So, this is something that we're very familiar with every day. We're dealing with many challenges, but we also know of the opportunities that come along with local reporters. They're unique in the fact that they have this unprecedented access to local sources. They can build trust with their audiences. Often they understand the issues they're covering, both from firsthand experience or proximity to the issue. We also know that, having an understanding of the language that they're using to report in is really important, right? Like, being able to connect with your sources in the same language that they speak actually has a significant impact on the final product of that story. So that's really critical. And I'm sure, Sonal, you experienced that with Spanish and English in the state of Texas. Now, at Global Press, we've published over 10,000 stories at this point, and many of them lead to changes in laws, influencing reforms, and they undo harmful stereotypes, global stereotypes that I think all of us really need to think about when we're talking about international news coverage. So, when it comes to journalism and democracy, I think Global Press is such an interesting case study for how you can cover topics that are both locally relevant and globally interconnected, and how stories are just really good stories for people, and that it's not necessarily about, making sure that it is just for a very specific subset of people that can access these stories. So that's what Global Press is all about. We've been around since 2006.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think it would be helpful, maybe, Lakshmi, if you can explain investigative journalism and service journalism to this particular audience. Everyone here is a consumer of media, but the four of us here might be using some jargon that not everybody understands. So
sure. So, one of
and by the way, while you're talking, I'm showing everybody globalpress.co, and folks should take a look at that. And also you can tell us about your funding model and things like that. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks for those questions, Shri. So first of all, we have the luxury of not covering breaking news, right? We don't cover the volcano that erupted on the day that it erupted. We're there tracking it 5 years later to tell you exactly how much money was spent on the recovery efforts or the relief to the communities that surrounded that volcano. But we're able to really deeply investigate stories over a long period of time. And in journalism, this is actually, this is not something that we all often have the luxury of doing. In journalism, you often say that the clock is your boss. And that doesn't necessarily always lead to really great in-depth reporting. And so being able to really kind of delve deep into topics that are complex, that require deep dives into data and into local sources, into local officials that might be hard to access over a period of time, really tracking, government responses, for example, all of that lends itself to really excellent investigative journalism, and that isn't necessarily done quickly. So there's a real difference between breaking news and investigative journalism. And then just a little bit about our funding model. Similar to others, as a nonprofit news organization, we are heavily funded by philanthropies, so foundations. They're all listed on our website, globalpress.co, under funders. And then we have some individual donors, and if you are all interested in donating to Global Press, you're able to do that at globalpressjournal.com. Just hit donate. And that's, that makes up our fundraising portfolio.
Thank you. And again, you can see what a great group of folks we've assembled here. We'll all benefit so much from hearing them talk about what we're looking at. So let me, Sonal, as you look at the state of journalism, so much bad news over the last few years. You alluded to that. The landscape has changed. Shobha kindly mentioned that I had started SAJA, the South Asian Journalists Association, SAJA.org. And she was saying it's a great sign that I came back after 23 years to be president of SAJA again. It's more like a punishment and paying for my sins. But it's wonderful to see that the young people today still want to go into journalism, still want to have an impact. But something like 25,000 journalists have lost their jobs in this century, just in America. And that's why we need places like Texas Tribune, and how you are covering. There's this term that our audience may not know, the news deserts, right? Like you were saying, so many counties in Texas without news, without access to news. So talk a little bit about that and how you see your role as Texas Tribune in terms of connecting and helping to make sure that we have democracy that we can continue to cover with our journalism.
Yeah, thanks, Shri. Important questions. And just quick facts again, 27 counties in Texas have no journalism whatsoever. We have 254 counties in Texas, to be fair. Half of the other counties have maybe news 2 to 3 days a week, which means almost a half of Texas doesn't get enough news. And what has happened is today, most news, whether it's even local TV, it's national news that people receive. They don't receive what's happening locally in their communities. So what's happening with your city council, what's happening with your mayor, what's happening in your communities, what are the arts and culture issues that are happening. So sometimes what happens when you don't have local news is you also lose the culture of what the community feels like, right? You're not actively participating. And what we know is when people don't have news, you have fewer people participating in elections, fewer people participating civically, and more importantly, things like municipal bond ratings are affected when you have no news because there's no one holding anyone accountable to whether what an official is saying something truthful or not is not true. So when you think about news, it has actually both an economic and a social impact, and to keep that in mind. I think too easily today we think about information as news. So just because you get something on Facebook, and it's why GigaFact actually exists, right? Just because you get information doesn't mean that's news. Too often we tend to think by sharing stuff on WhatsApp or by sharing stuff on Google, our YouTube channels or other things that's truth. We have to understand that understanding what is actually relevant, and when it's good journalism, you've actually spent the time to understand what's actually happening in the community, and you investigate it, you understand it, and then you relay that information to people. So why it matters that there is local news is that while we might provide the information for free, journalism is not free. It takes time to go do that work. And just to add to Lakshmi's comment about investigative, we did one on Uvalde after the shooting in the city of Uvalde, and we were there long after everyone left. right? And we spent the time understanding what was happening. And the reason we were a Pulitzer finalist in that category this year is because we actually learned after all that time that what the teachers were training their students to do and what the police were being trained for were two different things. And the reason the police didn't go in is they actually didn't think there were students in the school because it was so quiet. That kind of information, that kind of investigative journalism took us 6 to 8 months to investigate, to listen to every transcript, to understand that. That takes time to understand. And what will happen is police training will change, teacher training will change, but you'll have a different conversation that happens over time. But that work takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes energy from your journalist to spend that time doing it. But it's important that journalism, what happens in communities is when you have that information, you actually investigate. We did a story on a town in Texas that hadn't had an election in 18 years because there's no news. And nobody was holding any of the officials accountable. And so people just didn't have an election. When you have that kind of work, you sort of have to wonder, like, what does it mean for local democracy? Not big D democracy, not the national elections, but what does it mean for local democracy? Because for most people, democracy is felt, whether you're in Tanzania or Uganda or the United States, democracy is felt at a very local level. It's not felt at a national level. It's very local about what's happening in your community.
So I
Okay.
love that example because, when we're thinking about media markets like Zimbabwe or Mongolia, you're often thinking, oh, well, you have reporters out in Ulaanbaatar and in Harare. No, when we say local, we're not talking about the capital cities in these countries. We're talking about literally local reporters. So that means sometimes that's news deserts. Sometimes that is a place that maybe has just really poor employment practices when it comes to actually creating high quality journalism, right? There's so many ways to kind of dissect the system around journalism and that final product, and ways that we can kind of sew that work back together, from high quality employment to access to the actual audience, making sure that that final product gets to them. That's so critical. And it reminds me of one example from Zimbabwe, where really great investigative journalism related to gold mining, artisanal gold mining. A deep, long-term investigation done by Linda Majuru in Zimbabwe required, first of all, Linda to have high-quality employment, for her to be part of our duty of care program, which is a safety and security program for local reporters when extraction isn't an option, when there are attacks from governments, when you are investigating topics that they might be challenged by. But it also, was incredible to see Linda, not just rely on the data she gets from, local officials and international reports, but literally go and test water in her community herself to find out what the level of mercury is in that water that's being used in artisanal gold mining. This incredible story about international reports, but literally how the government has banned the use of mercury in artisanal gold mining, but actually no miners actually know that it's banned, and everybody's using it. And it's actually making up a significant portion of their economy in terms of their exports. And so, this is the global story, actually, because we all consume gold from different parts of the world, and we want to understand where it's coming from. And it's also a story for local miners that need to know critical information about how mercury is having an effect on their own health. Oh, and guess what? The mercury ends up in the water that's being shipped, consumed by the neighboring community, and the neighboring community doesn't know that there's high levels of mercury in their water. And so that's also a public health story. So you can really see how a story can take so many different layers and levels, but it's also really important for your community, that local community we're talking about, to access that story. So that means we were on Zimbabwean public radio talking about that story. We were in local WhatsApp channels sharing that story. We were giving presentations to miners associations to make sure that they had access to that story. And then we also worked with PBS NewsHour to do a segment on their evening news with Linda Majuru for an international audience. So there's so many different ways that we can reach people through really great investigative journalism.
Thank you, Lakshmi. And one of the things that you've mentioned, both of you have mentioned so far, the importance of connecting and collaboration within journalism. So I want to hear from Chandran about the role of collaboration. You laid out so many different newsrooms that you're working with. And why does that matter in terms of the democracy that we're all making sure that we have in this country and everywhere?
Yeah. Let me layer on a couple of pieces of data to the comments that Sonal made that so resonate with the GigaFact mission too. So not only is and the way Lakshmi was talking about, not only is local news kind of deeply needed and connected to the community and enabling of so much, it's also the case that according to a Pew research study that was done, that local news is vastly more trusted by communities than national corporatized media is. For better or for worse, they've kind of like worked themselves to a pretty tough spot. And I think local news continues to have the ear of the community. And so part of the reason why we started working with local and regional newsrooms is that they're kind of starting from a trust baseline that's already higher. The second thing is that a study published by Duke University, their journalism department last year, studied the fact-checking of public officials. And we saw the debate last night, and we heard about the immigrants, dining on pets comment, and the way it was in real time, fact checked, right? And what fact checking does is that it kind of adds some guardrails. It kind of adds a caution flag, right? That makes it less easy to just roll out whatever you want to say. And a really interesting study shows that the moment you get local, right, 50% of governors' statements have ever been fact checked. 16% of senators, 8% of Congress leaders have ever been fact-checked by their local, regional, home news services. 0.5% of state legislators and mayors' statements have ever been fact-checked, right? So it really is, we see the tip of the iceberg of this kind of large national fact-checking idea and the guardrails around it. But it really disappears as soon as you get local. So both local news is trusted, but there's also this kind of total absence of accountability and holding public officials accountable, which is so crucial now for democracy. So on the collaboration point, we decided that we're going to work with local newsrooms that clear the bar on transparency of funding, a really big commitment to nonpartisanship, and a readiness to be fact forward and not tell an ideological story. And we invite them to be part of GigaFact, and we then work with them. It's not GigaFact's voice. We are trying to tool them to be effective fact checkers in their communities and get the benefits associated with doing that work well. So everything about GigaFact is about identifying these newsrooms, helping them learn how to do this work, which is quite a bit different than the investigative work and the other traditional reporting work that they're doing. And until they start seeing the benefits of it, we kind of hold their hand. And once they start seeing the benefits of it, it really is, it's quite something to watch. And so it's a very collaborative affair, but the way we think about it is that we're also attacking the parts which are both the least provisioned right now in our democracy, and partnering with people who are the most trusted, ironically, right?
Yeah, that's a great combination, and you're able to do that. So one of the things I want to remind people is that this conversation is right now live on the Indiaspora LinkedIn page, and I'm just going to show you what that looks like. So this is kind of weird. We're a few seconds delayed, of course, between the two. So Chandra is still speaking there while we are here. But everyone, please, I know you're all big LinkedIn users. Please follow Indiaspora. Look at that, 25,000 followers. And please make sure that you are sharing this with your friends. So just post your comments, and we'll go to the questions that have been posted there as well as in the chat here. So everyone, please share this with your friends and family. They can watch live or they can watch later. And let's go to some of the questions here. Sunil is watching, he said, in a village in India. And Sunil's question is what trends in publishing are shaping the future of magazines in both India and the US. So I have some thoughts, but let's see who's comfortable talking about India and the US. Lakshmi, do you want to take a shot?
I'm happy yeah, go ahead. Lakshmi knows this better than I do.
Okay, now this is getting, by the way, this is too
what,
weird now. Look, it's the mirror effect here.
Yeah, this is a little awkward, Sri. But thanks for showing us what's going on LinkedIn. No, I think, India, many other countries globally, the United States included, when we're talking of attacks on the press, freedom of press, like we have some really big issues to deal with around the world today. We're talking about India, we need to also recognize that, out of 180 countries, India ranked 161 in Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index in 2023. So it's gone down 21 positions. In 2023, we actually did we obviously know about many of the issues going on across the United States. I don't think that's what's really eye-opening here, that no country is really perfect at this right now. But I think there are some major issues that need to be addressed both here in the United States when we're talking about freedom of expression, everything that we experienced over the last 4 years. I know Texas Tribune and other local newsrooms really were challenged with that. We had a lot of newsrooms coming to Global Press asking us about our duty of care program, our local safety and security program that focuses on digital, physical, emotional, and legal security for local reporters when evacuation and extraction isn't an option. And in 2023, we actually did a piece on global press freedom, understanding what the state of global press freedom is around the world. And we conducted a survey of 499 media workers in 33 countries. 39% of those interviewed responded that they felt less free since 2020, since the pandemic, while 26% felt a lack of implementation of press freedom laws. So when we talk about democracies and we talk about press freedom, there's what's written in law and what's actually happening on the ground, right? And so we have a lot of experience with kind of this decay and this decline in press freedom around the world since the pandemic.
I may add something, Sri, just really quickly. So I think the questioner was asking about magazines in particular, and I'm going to completely not answer that and instead say that as we were exploring, is there a possibility to start a GigaFact India? And I was in conversations with the head of a big journalism program in India, and he lowered his voice. I've not been in a conversation like this. He lowered his voice and looked around and he said, we won't get any funding in India for a GigaFact India because no philanthropist will put their money here if they're going to get an income tax raid in the week following, right? So the kind of the practical aspect of the chilling of journalism and that freedom that Lakshmi is talking about. So literally, I was told, come back in 2 to 3 years when there's kind of like a very different climate in India, and so there's no kind of room for a funded fact-checking model in India. But it just as an indicator, and it's an anecdote, right? But I do think there's just in support of that point.
Thank you, Sonal.
Sri, can I just add a couple of things? So one, it is easy to blame the press for everything, whether it's in the US or globally, for things that you don't like to read or truths that might come out. The job of the press is to hold a mirror to ourselves. Are we doing the things that we're saying we're doing? I used to be in government. I know how painful it was to have bad stories written about you. That's important. But there's always been an understanding that the reason you have stories being told about you is to hold yourself to the mirror and saying, are we doing the things that we're saying we're doing? If we are friends with anyone, it is probably a bad thing, right? We should not be liked because we're doing our job well, which is holding officials accountable, making sure the policies are impacting the people that we're saying we're impacting. That is the job of the press. I feel like it's easy to punch the press all the time. And the reason we exist is, just imagine all these people that are going into these communities and to these countries. They're doing it out of not even their own safety. It's not even clear it's always safe for them. We saw what happened in most recently in Russia, and the Wall Street Journal reporter, and we had to get him out. And it's not safe at times, but you do it because you believe in it. On the publishing side of this, just to keep in mind, it is hard today to get paid to do journalism. That's the magazine. Fundamentally, paid journalism is expensive for profit because there's so many ways. You have to be thinking about which platform is someone going to find you on. I don't just get to publish it on my website. I actually think about, do I have an Instagram reel? Are we on TikTok? Are we in YouTube? You have to think about all of those platforms. You have to put that information on in order for people to get access to that information. Many times when you go on to other people's platforms, you don't get the revenue. So if I go on YouTube and my story is read on YouTube or on Instagram, the revenue goes to Instagram, not to us. So to think about how do you get paid in a time when people want free information is hard. And that is actually, I think, for magazines, both in the United States and in India, newspapers, it's the same question. And even for digital organizations like ourselves, it is hard to figure out revenue models, because that's why we do events, because it is not as simple as people getting free information. But again, journalism's not free. The information might be free, but the journalism doesn't come free.
And it's also not free because even if you're not paying for it, you are the product, right? Famously with Facebook. And so you're paying for it some way. By the way, speaking of Facebook, we're also live on the Indiaspora Facebook page. Please share and like there. And also please follow us on Twitter. Indiaspora Forum is the Twitter site, and they're doing live tweeting as we're doing this. A great team at Indiaspora. We really appreciate you sharing these thoughts that are coming out from our speakers. Speaking of money, Sanjeev, our CEO, was asking a question in the chat that I'm sure everybody's seen, where he was talking about how these folks are from nonprofits, and it seems that there is no commercial market for the type of work they do. Is that an accurate assessment? Will the world actually pay to consume fact-based news and analysis? And we were just talking about that. I would say that you're seeing here three of the best world-class nonprofit efforts in the news business, but there are also thousands of very important news organizations in the US, some tiny and some huge. Just outside this door, for those who joined, I'm at the Sundaram Tagore Gallery for the JLF final New York celebration. Dean Baquet is here. Dean Baquet is the former executive editor of the New York Times, editor-in-chief of the New York Times. And he and I were just talking an hour ago about the importance of nonprofit journalism. We need both, and we need the Indian American community to support nonprofit newsrooms, but also other newsrooms. One of the things I do every Sunday on my social media channels is read the New York Times or another newspaper out loud. And I do it not to support the New York Times, but to encourage all of you to subscribe to any news organization, your local newspaper, your local digital website. Support them. It'll make a difference, material difference in what we're doing. We have about 12 minutes left and lots of questions and comments coming in. So please keep posting your questions. Annie says, how do we as consumers of social media filter out fake news, especially as we near the election? How can we avoid the he said, she said game in media and make informed choices? And that got 3 thumbs up. So that's a very important question. Chandran, we'll start with you.
Well, so it's filtered out perfectly, big job, right? But the way you make a start at this stuff is, number one, don't share content that you haven't verified. If it doesn't make sense to you, don't instantly share it, right? So it's just kind of a practice so that you're kind of reducing that. The second thing is go to Duke Reporters Lab. They've got a list of 140 plus or 200 plus fact checkers around the world, and if you're caring about is this true type things, do a Google search. The answers are not bad at all, right? And go look at those list of fact checkers and do a super quick search to see if this thing has already been fact checked. So I'd say that the biggest thing you can do is to kind of start treating information as it comes to you as you would stream water, right? You're going to have to do some set of things to consume it and share it with people you love. And I would say, taking some personal responsibility for information that's coming your way and acting like a bit of your own, of a researcher or journalist around that is the thing that I would say. But there are some resources, they're not perfect, but it does put the burden back on the person.
And I will say in the Desi community, we heard the word WhatsApp earlier today in the conversation. WhatsApp is at the same time, simultaneously, one of the best ways to communicate. I run my entire business on WhatsApp and not on Slack or Teams or anything else. And at the same time, the worst mind poisoning, fake information, disinformation out there. And us Desis are the world champions of using WhatsApp for good and bad. And so I think all of us in every forum we're in, our alumni groups, our family chats, we have an obligation to not just forward. That's one thing. Don't forward if you're not sure, but also to fact check and correct in the family. There's always somebody in the family who's sharing the wrong, fake medical information, fake election information. You correct them enough, they will stop. But if you don't correct them, it will just stay. And the answer is not for you to just quit your alumni group. If you just quit, that doesn't help. They'll still keep doing it. So I think we have a role to play in this as
and to do it nicely, right?
Yeah.
It's really kind of approaching this as kind of with soft hands, firm and soft hands, right? I think it's an important thing to do. So.
Thank you.
There's also a role for news organizations to play here, though, right? Like we can do a lot as well to be transparent about some of the processes in news gathering. For example, something really simple that we do at Global Press, we share every member of the news production team. That's from the reporter to the editors, to the fact checkers, to the copy editors, to translators. Everyone that has touched that story receives a byline on that story, and they get the transparency. Their audience gets the transparency in, oh, well, I know exactly who touched this piece, and it went through many different hands. And I don't think a lot of people understand the actual process of journalism. It's been such an elite and kind of inaccessible space for so many. And I think there's a lot that we can do as news organizations to actually, not totally take on that role of media literacy, but to at least create some transparent processes in our news production, news gathering, and presentation. I think there's some great organizations out there helping news organizations learn how to do this. Trusting News is a really great organization out there that helps other news organizations and consumers of news really kind of understand how a story was put together, especially when you're dealing with investigative journalism and wanting to learn whether or not you should trust that piece, what you should look for.
Thank you. We have lots of questions coming in and only a few minutes left. So let's run through these very quickly. So short answers, please. What role does social media platforms of all kinds, what do they play, and how can they be held accountable for sharing false news? Chandran, your thoughts?
Yeah, so social media platforms, it's time to have responsible regulation of social media platforms. The good news in all of this is that you can actually construct regulatory frameworks for social media platforms that's not based on adjudicating truth versus lies, but just good process. So for instance, a short delay in the like button reduces the virality of flow of information. There are lots of kind of safe windshield kinds of design things that can be done to really dramatically change the alignment of social media with kind of good information as opposed to just popular information. It's not hard to do. It has to be done to have any meaningful long-term solution, because they've kind of monopolized where consumers get their information from. And if the only five, dietary choices in front of my door were 5 fast food restaurants, it's going to be an unhealthy world, right? And we are in that space, and we're all trying to do the best we can, but there needs to be a conversation about responsible regulation of social media.
Thank you. A question came in from Pushpita, who says, this panel focuses on diversity. Study after study has shown newsrooms lack ideological diversity. What are the panel's thoughts on addressing this gap? I have some thoughts, but I'm going to have Sonal talk about being in Texas and how do you ensure you have different perspectives so that the news doesn't all come from the same side.
Yeah, we go very far. Like, one of the things that we have made a very clear decision on is we don't do editorials, we don't do opinions, we don't do endorsements. Our job is just to relay the facts of what we see, and we let people make the decisions that they do. What we take pride in is that we have both Republicans and Democrats donating to us, and members of the organization. So many times we get people who love Ted Cruz and who hate Ted Cruz, who love Dan Crenshaw, hate Dan Crenshaw. But it's important for us that we're getting all of that, because it's important that we're relaying the information in a way to help people make news accessible to them. Again, if we do our job well in the way we think about it, you're going to ask the next 10 questions of like, okay, I now know this. What do I need to ask of my officials, or what do I need to do? What we try not to do is give opinions about what we do and how we do it, but getting access and talking to Republicans in the state legislature, talking to Democrats in the state legislature, talking to independents across our state. We make that a point of the work that we do, and certainly our journalists, I know, are out there doing that. But it's a reason we don't do editorials and opinions.
Okay, that's very smart. I will just say one thing about ideological diversity, which has become something that every newsroom that I know has gone out to seek out people who represent different views. For a long time, lots of newspapers only hired, say, Ivy League's students, and all of that is changing. But one of the reasons is that not everybody goes into journalism. Part of the reason why you may wonder why the idea that lots of journalists are liberal comes from the fact that if you are someone who is conservative and likes this, by nature, you are happy with the state of affairs. And journalism is not about reporting on the things that are working, but on the things that are not working. And so that's why some young people who go into journalism tend to have those liberal views. But every newsroom I know has now going out of their way to find. And by the way, one last thought on liberal bias, because that was implied in this and another question as well, is that the bias in media is actually for being corporate and supporting kind of corporate ideals, because most of them are big businesses. And that's why having nonprofit journalism is so important, so that there are other ways in which funding can happen. Arun Kumar has a question. Arun, would you turn on your mic and ask the question?
Yeah, first of all, great conversation and great to see all of you. My question was really about which newspapers today do you think are the most independent, maybe fearless, whether in the US, India, or around the world? And the example I remember is during the emergency. Many of you were probably not born then. The Indian Express stood out as a very brave paper led by Ramnath Goenka. So who are the papers today? In India, I've noticed today that the regional papers seem to be much more independent than the major national papers.
That's a really great question. And thank you, Arun, also for all your support of Indiaspora and for being a speaker so often and being part of the community. We are really grateful to have you all here. If you don't know Arun, look him up and his amazing background, and real pioneer in the Indiaspora world and American world. I'm going to ask each of the folks to kind of respond to that question, but we're also, because in the interest of time, I'm going to just combine it with another question that came in. So if you can each kind of talk about this, and this is, I love this from Shobha, that if you each were to moderate a presidential debate this season, what would be one question you would ask the two candidates at the presidential level? So if you can bring in both of those thoughts, we'll start with you, Chandran, on those two.
So I'm not going to name a newspaper, but what I will say is that as we've looked for criteria for news organizations to join GigaFact, one of the things that we've started doing is to say, who separates editorial from factual reporting, right? Who's willing to make that kind of brave decision? Because it is a brave decision, right? Who is willing to allow themselves to be rated by the newly appearing rating systems on their factuality and on their bias, right? So there are organizations like Ad Fontes and All Sides, and there are these new rating services that are starting to emerge. And I'd say being able to, in this very precarious time, stay on the path of fact-forward journalism is the brave act, right? And I think there's a kind of a growing community of people who are doing that, and they're kind of green shoots of journalism in the ashes of the past. So I think that's how I'd answer the bravery question. I have not the foggiest idea as to what question I would ask in a presidential thing, but maybe I will after the others come up with some good ideas.
Okay, Lakshmi, over to you.
I think I'd also pass on that Shobha question, even though it's a very good one. I think it is, when you take a look at any news story in any news organization, I encourage you to look at the sources in that story. Are you only hearing from the World Bank and the IMF and the head of X government? Is there a local voice in it? Did you get an actual quote from someone that experienced what's happening in the story, the issue in the story? Is there a diversity of sources? Is there a diversity of experts? Are there a diversity of voices, maybe on both sides of the experience, of ideological experience, whatever that might be? But a diversity in sources is often a really great sign of strong journalism. I think the second is when we're talking about some of the things that newsrooms can do to just be transparent in their practices. And so look for, who wrote that story? What's the, not just the byline, but the date line? Was it a story reported in Kirumba, DRC, but why was it filed in London? Right? Like, what's the connection? And is that actually local reporting? Is that laptop journalism? Like, who actually wrote that story? And then, I think the work that Chandran does is so important. I think, Global Press, we employ fact checkers. And I think it's really important, even as journalists, for us to constantly keep our processes accountable and to make sure that there is an accuracy process throughout. And so, that's a really great sign of strong journalism. So those are 3 tips I'd give everyone to follow.
I don't know that I have anything to add to Lakshmi's great points on the 3 tips, because I think everyone should follow those tips. I'm certainly not going to pick any particular news organization to read, but I do think it's important to read different sources of news, because it's important to see people bring different perspectives also, right? Like the Wall Street Journal and the FT will give you financial news. So it's a perspective from a financial perspective. The New York Times and Wall Street and Washington Post might give you national news. Texas Tribune is going to really give you the Texas story and the effect of how Texas might be experiencing some of these things. But I would say read your local news and read your national news. Don't let just national become the story, because it's easy to read just national news, but know what's happening in your community, because you might be experiencing something very differently from the way the nation might be writing it. So a national story might be written, but and then finally, I want to say, just pay for local news. Like, don't, I know it's easy to want to not pay, but pay for news, because you're really paying for journalists. This is not a group of people that get paid a ton of money. They are doing it because it's out of love. And to do this out of love is really a mission. And they're doing it because they believe in something. So believe in them. Don't just look for free, actually pay for it.
That's a great note for all of us watching. I think one of the messages here is to all become better students of the media and understand where your journalism is coming from, who's making it. Just like everyone now pays attention to food labels and knows where the food comes from. Know where your media comes from. And I think Lakshmi put that so beautifully, as did the others. So I think that's something that we can all think about. One thing that I would say that we should all be thinking about, we have these We have these few weeks to the elections. It's not just about the presidential race, right? Don't forget all the local elections, the statewide elections, counties, everything else. Everything makes a difference in the success of this country. And we need watchdog journalists, and we need to support them. So we'd really appreciate everybody being here and coming and spending time with us. I know how busy everyone is. So really grateful. I'm going to just make a pitch for saja.org. Everyone should go check it out. And we are celebrating our 30th anniversary, October 11th and 12th in New York City. And you don't need to be a journalist to be involved with Saja. So please check that out. We've some terrific journalists, including some who've been to a lot of Indiaspora events, are going to speak and be part of Saja. So please join us, saja.org, October 11th and 12th in New York. And with that, I'm going to hand this back to Shobha to say goodbye. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Shri. You were great.
Thank you.
Thank you all for a fantastic panel. What an interesting conversation. And how lucky are we at Indiaspora that we have thoughtful practitioners who bring systems awareness to this conversation. Phenomenal conversation. Leave more enriched and enlightened. Thanks for that. Though none of you took the answer on what question you would ask in the presidential debate. I'm going to have you come back on that and answer it at some point, I think, which is actually on par. Yesterday, neither of them answered any of the questions. So you guys were all pretty darn good at this too, I think. Thank you, though. Fabulous conversation. And one quick note I wanted to make, because Amita and I encountered this as we were putting this panel together. We were so happy when this came together and the depth of talent in our community. But somebody did write to us and point out, what about science journalism? So we are now aware that despite the breadth of what we think we are trying to capture from local to global and all in between, there are many aspects of journalism we are not going to be able to cover in one program. So hopefully it'll be a series over time that we get to cover. Thank you, everyone. From all of us at Indiaspora. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.